The dawn breaks cold and gray over the Avarere plain in May 451, casting pale light across a landscape that will soon be soaked in blood. Mist clings to the marshlands that border the field, obscuring the treacherous ground where reeds grow thick and water lies hidden beneath deceptive grass. To the east, the massive army of the Sasanian Persian Empire assembles in formations so vast they seem to stretch to the horizon itself. 180,000 soldiers, the full might of one of the ancient world's greatest superpowers, prepare for what their commanders assume will be a straightforward suppression of provincial rebellion. War elephants, armored in steel plates and bearing archers and towers on their backs, lumber into position, their trumpeting calls echoing across the plain. Heavy cavalry, the legendary sovereign knights whose armored charges have broken armies from the Mediterranean to the borders of India, check their equipment with the confidence of warriors who have never known defeat. Persian infantry, disciplined and battle-hardened from decades of conflict against Rome, stand in perfect ranks awaiting orders. Banners displaying the sacred fire symbol of Zoroastrianism flutter above the host, proclaiming this as not merely a military campaign, but a holy war to enforce religious uniformity across the empire. Across the field, positioned carefully with the marshlands protecting their flanks and low hills at their backs, stands a force that appears pitifully small by comparison. 66,000 Armenian rebels, men who have chosen to face certain death rather than surrender their faith and identity. They are not professional soldiers, but farmers, merchants, artisans, and minor nobles who have taken up arms in desperate defiance. Yet as the morning light strengthens, revealing their formations, something becomes evident that surprises Persian scouts. These rebels are not a disorganized mob, but a coordinated army, positioned with tactical intelligence that speaks of careful planning. Their deployment takes maximum advantage of the terrain, forcing any attacker to cross difficult ground where numbers matter less than maneuverability. At their head rides Vardan Mamikonian, a man whose name will echo through Armenian history for 15 centuries, a commander who understands that winning this battle is impossible, but that fighting it with courage and strategic brilliance might achieve something more valuable than victory: the preservation of a people's soul. The story of this extraordinary confrontation begins not on the battlefield, but in the corridors of imperial power where decisions affecting millions are made with cold calculation. The Sasanian Empire, ruled by King Yazdijerd II, spans from Mesopotamia to Central Asia, encompassing dozens of ethnic groups, languages, and religious traditions. For centuries, the empire has maintained relative stability through a policy of tolerance, allowing subject peoples to preserve their local customs and beliefs as long as they pay taxes and provide military service. Armenia, situated on the empire's northwestern frontier, has existed under this arrangement for decades. The Armenian nobility serve as cavalry in Persian campaigns. Armenian merchants facilitate trade between East and West. Armenian peasants farm the fertile valleys and pay their tribute. And crucially, the Armenian people practice Christianity, having been the first nation to officially adopt the faith in 301 AD, more than a century before Rome itself converted. But Yazdijerd II harbors ambitions beyond mere political control. He seeks religious and cultural uniformity, believing that a single faith binding all subjects will strengthen the empire against external threats, particularly the rival Roman Empire to the west, which also professes Christianity. In 449, he issues a decree that shakes Armenia to its foundations. All subjects of the empire must convert to Zoroastrianism, abandoning their ancestral faiths and embracing the official religion of the Persian state. Fire temples will be built in every Armenian city. Christian churches will be closed or converted. Priests who refuse to recant will be executed. Children will be educated in Persian customs and language. The decree is not presented as negotiable or gradual. It is an ultimatum backed by the full weight of imperial military power. The Armenian response splits along predictable lines of self-interest versus principle. Some nobles, calculating that resistance is futile and that preserving their lands and positions matters more than abstract faith, comply with the decree. They journey to the Persian capital at Ctesiphon, perform the required rituals before the sacred fire, and return home as collaborators, despised by their own people but secure in their personal survival. But others, led by Vardan Mamikonian and a group of bishops and nobles who refuse to compromise, choose a different path. They send messages throughout Armenia, calling the people to resist. They appeal to Christian identity, to national pride, to the memory of ancestors who died defending Armenian independence. The response stuns even the organizers. From mountain villages and valley towns, from monastery walls and noble estates, Armenians answer the call. Old men who fought in past wars take weapons from storage. Young men barely trained in combat volunteer with fierce determination. Priests bless makeshift banners. Women prepare supplies and tend to logistics. An army begins to coalesce, not through imperial decree or feudal obligation, but through shared conviction that some things matter more than survival. Vardan Mamikonian, though a seasoned commander who has fought in Persian campaigns against Rome, understands the military mathematics with brutal clarity. He cannot match Persian numbers. He cannot win a prolonged war of attrition. His supply lines are minimal. His soldiers lack the training and equipment of professional armies. If this becomes a conventional campaign, fought on terms favorable to Persian strengths, the rebellion will be crushed within weeks. His only chance lies in forcing a single decisive battle, fought on ground that negates Persian advantages and where Armenian courage might count for more than Persian superiority in every measurable category. He studies the terrain of the Avarayr plain with meticulous attention, noting the marshlands that border the field, the uncertain ground that appears solid but can trap heavy cavalry, the hills that provide defensive positions and restrict maneuver. He positions his forces with the precision of a chess master, placing archers where they can cover the marsh approaches, positioning his limited cavalry on firm ground, organizing infantry into tight formations that can resist shock attacks. As the Persian army deploys for battle, their commanders survey the Armenian positions with contempt mixed with grudging respect for the rebels' choice of terrain. The Persian battle plan relies on overwhelming force applied at multiple points simultaneously. The war elephants will advance first, their psychological impact shattering enemy morale even before contact. Behind them, waves of heavy cavalry will exploit gaps in the enemy line, using their superior armor and training to break through and encircle Armenian forces. Infantry will provide support and mop up resistance. It is a proven tactical system that has won hundreds of battles across 3 centuries. The commanders see no reason why it should fail today, though they acknowledge the difficult terrain will slow the advance and reduce coordination. The battle begins with the thunderous advance of the war elephants, massive beasts trained for combat, moving forward through the morning mist like mobile fortresses. Armenian soldiers, many seeing such creatures for the first time, feel primal fear rise in their chests. But Vardan has prepared them psychologically, reminding them that elephants are animals that can be wounded, that can panic, that can become liabilities if properly targeted. Armenian archers, positioned in elevated locations and along the marsh edges, loose volley after volley of arrows at the advancing elephants. Most arrows bounce harmlessly off armor, but some find gaps, striking exposed flesh, driving the beasts to fury and pain. One elephant, maddened by wounds, veers off course and crashes into Persian infantry, trampling its own soldiers. Another refuses to advance, trumpeting in distress, blocking the units behind it. The elephant attack, which should overwhelm Armenian positions through sheer terror, instead creates confusion in the Persian front lines. Behind the faltering elephant assault, the Persian heavy cavalry begins its charge, the elite sovereign knights who have broken every enemy they have ever faced. They thunder forward in disciplined formation, lances leveled, armor glinting, the ground shaking beneath thousands of hoofs. But the terrain that Vardan has chosen reveals its value precisely now. The cavalry, attempting to maintain formation across the plain, encounters the marshy ground that borders the firm areas. Horses, weighted down by armored riders, plunge suddenly into mud and hidden water. What began as an unstoppable charge transforms into chaos as horses struggle, knights curse, and the tight formations essential to cavalry effectiveness disintegrate. Those riders who remain on solid ground find themselves compressed into narrow corridors of advance, unable to spread out and use their numbers effectively, forced to approach Armenian positions through limited approaches that become killing zones. Armenian archers, positioned to cover these exact approach routes, unleash devastating fire on the struggling cavalry. Arrows find horses' flanks, causing animals to rear and throw riders. Armored knights, designed to fight on horseback, become clumsy and vulnerable when dismounted in treacherous terrain. The charge, which should sweep away Armenian resistance through momentum and shock, instead breaks apart into isolated struggles across confused ground. Persian commanders, observing from their command positions, realize with growing alarm that their tactical advantages are being systematically neutralized by terrain they underestimated and Armenian positioning they failed to anticipate. The battle escalates into a grinding, desperate struggle that lasts through the entire day. Persian forces, despite their setbacks, continue pressing attacks across the entire line, using their numerical superiority to maintain constant pressure. Armenian defenders, fighting from prepared positions and motivated by the knowledge that defeat means not just death but the extinction of their cultural identity, resist with ferocious determination. Young men barely trained in combat stand shoulder to shoulder with veteran warriors, holding ground against impossible odds. Priests move among the soldiers, offering blessings and reminders of what they fight for. Wounded men refuse to withdraw, binding their injuries and returning to the line. The marsh edges become choked with bodies of Persian soldiers who attempted crossing and were cut down by Armenian arrows. The hills echo with the clash of steel and the screams of dying men and horses. As afternoon shadows lengthen, both armies are bloodied and exhausted. Persian casualties mount far beyond what commanders expected. The elephants have been neutralized or driven off. The cavalry, though still formidable, has lost much of its cohesion and psychological dominance. Infantry, committed to grinding frontal assaults across difficult ground, suffers heavy losses without achieving breakthrough. Yet Armenian casualties are proportionally even worse. Fighting against superior numbers for hours has decimated entire units. Supplies of arrows run dangerously low. Defensive positions, no matter how well chosen, cannot hold forever against relentless pressure. Vardan himself, fighting in the front lines as much commander as warrior, realizes that his forces are approaching the breaking point. The decisive moment comes late in the afternoon when Persian commanders, frustrated by the unexpectedly fierce resistance and concerned about their own mounting losses, commit their final reserves to a massive coordinated assault across the entire Armenian line. This represents the last roll of the dice for both sides. If the Armenians hold, Persian morale will shatter and the invasion may be abandoned. If Armenians break, the rebellion ends in massacre. The assault crashes forward with the desperation of an army that expected easy victory and instead found nightmare. Armenian positions, already strained to the limit, begin to crack. The left flank wavers. Gaps open in the center. Persian soldiers, sensing victory finally within reach, surge forward with renewed energy. But even as Armenian lines fracture, even as Vardan falls mortally wounded, cut down by multiple Persian soldiers in hand-to-hand combat, even as the battle tips decisively toward Persian victory, something unexpected occurs. The Persian army, despite winning the tactical engagement, does not pursue with the ruthless efficiency expected of professional soldiers. They do not press the rout. They do not chase down fleeing Armenians to complete the annihilation. Instead, shaken by their own casualties, awed by the unexpected ferocity of the resistance, disturbed by the realization that suppressing this rebellion will require far more blood and treasure than anticipated, they allow the survivors to withdraw. The battlefield belongs to Persia, but the moral victory, the demonstration that Armenians will fight to the death rather than surrender their identity, belongs to the rebels. The aftermath of Avarir reshapes the entire dynamic of Persian-Armenian relations. Yazdijerd II, receiving reports of the battle, recognizes that his policy of forced conversion has failed. He has won a battlefield engagement, but lost the larger struggle. Attempting to enforce Zoroastrianism on a population willing to die rather than convert would require permanent military occupation, constant suppression of revolts, and the devastation of a frontier province that provides valuable soldiers and tax revenue. The cost-benefit analysis no longer favors religious uniformity. Within years, Persian authorities quietly abandon efforts to force Armenian conversion. Churches reopen. Priests resume their duties. The Armenian alphabet and literature, threatened with extinction, survive and flourish. The nation that seemed destined for cultural annihilation instead preserves its identity through willingness to pay the ultimate price. Vardan Mamikonian, dead on the battlefield, becomes something more powerful than any living commander could be. He transforms into a martyr, a symbol, a reminder to future generations that courage and principle can achieve victories that appear militarily impossible. The Armenian Church canonizes him as a saint. His name appears in prayers and hymns. Children learn his story as their first lesson in national history. The Battle of Avarar, though technically a defeat, is remembered and celebrated as the moment when Armenian identity proved indestructible, when ordinary people facing the greatest empire of their age chose death over submission and, through that choice, secured survival for their descendants 15 centuries into the future. The strategic implications extend beyond Armenia itself. The Sasanian Empire, learning from Avarar, moderates its policies toward other subject peoples, recognizing that cultural and religious diversity, while complicating administration, costs less than perpetual rebellion. The concept of religious freedom, though not formalized in modern terms, gains practical acceptance through the hard lesson that faith cannot be changed at sword point when populations value it more than life. Rome, watching from across the frontier, draws its own conclusions about the limits of imperial power and the dangers of cultural suppression. On the Avarar plain, where 66,000 faced 180,000 and bought cultural survival with their blood, the marsh grasses eventually covered the graves, and the seasons washed away the visible traces of battle. But the memory, preserved in church liturgy and national consciousness, never faded, never lost its power to inspire, proving that battles are ultimately won or lost not on the field itself, but in the meaning that survivors and descendants assign to the sacrifice, and that sometimes losing with honor achieves more than winning through compromise.